Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I would like to welcome you to the third webinar entitled Creating Societal Impact, Why, How, and What. This is the third webinar of a webinar series developed by the MBA in Sustainable Management at ISCTE Executive Education and ISCTE Business School. And this specific webinar is organized in partnership with FLAD, Fundação Luso-Americana para o Desenvolvimento, which is a partner of this MBA. And today, I have the honor to be with three distinguished guests that will be discussing this topic. I will briefly introduce each one of them, and then we'll start a lively conversation around these topics. First of all, welcome, Michael, Louise, and John. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Same here.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. So I'll start with Michael. Michael Walm is Executive Board Member of FLAD, our partner. And as a member of the FLAD Executive Council, Michael Walm has a PhD in Political Science from the University of Connecticut in the US. He is Executive Manager of Higher Education Programs and Nonprofit Organizations in the US and Europe, and the founder of FLAD's UMass in Lisbon, which was with ISCTE, by the way, and Study in Portugal Network programs. So for 21 years, he was a professor at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. Welcome, Mike, and again.
Thank you.
We also have with us Luís Amado. So Luís is the Executive Director of B Corp Portugal. He's a very proud father of 4 children, as he describes it in his bio, which I love. And of course, he wants to leave a better world for his children. So Luís is responsible for the B Corp movement in Portugal and the founder of Less, doing more with less. He will maybe explain us a little bit more about that. So he has been present in several governing and executive bodies of social organizations focused on social inclusion. He was responsible for supporting the creation of social business at EDP Foundation, and he has over 20 years of management and consulting experience in startups in different areas, including being part of the board of FTSE 20 companies. So he's passionate about sustainability. Thank you, Luís, for being with us.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction.
Now we have John Vasconcelos. It's really a pleasure to have you here as well. So John is the president and CEO of South Coast Community Foundation, an organization which seeks to mobilize philanthropy by matching donors and resources with community needs. And of course, for the benefit of the 41 communities in southeastern Massachusetts. Previously, John served as Senior Regional Director of the Southeast and Boston regions of the Trustees of Reservations. Other experience includes Managing Director of Development and Marketing for the Gay Men's Health Crisis, Vice President of Development and Communications at the Buzzards Bay Coalition, and Director of Development for the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. You're more than welcome, John. Bem-vindo.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Bem-vinda.
So now that we've been introduced, I would like to start this discussion, which of course the focus is on societal impact, and that's why you are here with us. But I'd like to start with the why question, because the debate here is centered around sustainability as well, which is the core aspect of the MBA as well. So again, it might be a naive question that I've been doing in every webinar, but why do you think we need to be concerned about sustainability? So who would like to start?
I can go ahead.
Come on, Luís, thank you.
Because I have 4 children and they won't have a world to live in as the one we have if we don't take into account that will be more and more every day. We are becoming more and more every day. And the resources are not growing as fast as the population is growing, and we are not using them, taking into account the global scope, the global analysis that we should do before we start using them, without thinking about all the impacts that our decisions can have in terms of the different externalities that we are creating by those uses, namely in terms of environment, in terms of the long-term availability of the resources, etc. So basically, I think we have been living in a world that has been suffering from some myopia regarding the assessment that has done to the real costs of the different materials, resources we have been using. And if we don't change that, maybe we cannot change it anymore. So I think it's or now or never.
Thank you, Luis, for this introduction. John or Michael, would you
All
like
right,
to?
I guess I'll jump in. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with what Luis just said. You know, I mean, I find myself also as somebody who, you know, always have to kind of remind myself about the language that I use, you know, because it's so easy to sort of talk about, you know, the sustainability problem, when in reality, you know, we're talking about a climate emergency, a climate catastrophe. You know, I think in some ways, even the language that we use to describe this issue, you know, has to be in some ways ramped up to match the severity of the crisis that we face. You know, and in preparing and thinking about, you know, what we were going to talk about today, you know, I'm teaching, of course, you know, at the university, not in sustainability per se, but in broader courses in political science. And, you know, one of the things that I just recently was covering with my students was, you know, this almost perennial debate that has existed really every time that you have a status quo ideology of some kind. You almost inevitably, whether we're talking, you know, back in the 19th century or the 18th century when the status quo was, you know, absolutist monarchies, you know, or later on when the status quo was sort of industrial economics, and, you know, you had folks like Marx and others, you know, confronting that and feeling like that needed a change. And then we have today, you know, and I feel like no matter what status quo we're talking about, you inevitably have a division between those who want to reform the status quo and those who feel that a revolution is necessary, right? And in many ways, I feel we're like at one of those moments, you know, where, and I'll go out on a limb here and say, you know, one of the things that I think folks like Kate Raworth or Mariana Mazzucato and their work, maybe Piketty in his work on inequality, one of the things that I think they've tried to sensitize us to that is so embedded in the way that we just think about business and in a capitalist global economy is this focus that we have on growth, right? The growth is always good. Everything is about growth. We measure progress in terms of growth. And I catch myself doing this, you know, I'm as guilty as anybody. You know, one of my projects here at FLAD is trying to bring more American students to Portugal. And, you know, one of the metrics that we typically use is, you know, pre-COVID, how fast we were growing and how many students came, you know, and do I sit around and think about, well, they all have to come on a plane and, you know, what's the carbon impact of all of them coming abroad? No, I ignore that and I focus on, you know, on all the good things that happens from intercultural international travel. And my point here is that I think, you know, when we really get down to it, we're facing this kind of reform versus revolution moment about the nature of growth and whether growth is really all it's cracked up to be. And so I'll leave it at that because I think John probably has more interesting things to say, but I'll give that as a provocative first crack.
Well, sorry to disappoint everybody, but that was more interesting than I have to say. But your comment, Michael, about how important words are makes me stop and think about the word sustainability, because it has become one of those words that suddenly people get a framework. And Anna and I had a conversation last week about, when you're talking about sustainability, what do you mean? Because as someone who works in the philanthropic world, it has a different meaning. But before I get into that, I want to touch on, because you've invited me, Michael, by thinking about the words, the other word that has an etymological connection to sustainability, which is sustenance. It's like, how do we, it's almost like, Anna, when you say why sustainability, I'm like, well, how do you not? I mean, the squirrels know to collect nuts before the snows come. How do we not know how to anticipate those needs? And then the other image that came to me, and if you follow protests, and I'm confident there's a version of this in Portugal, in the United States, you can't help but, and it tends to be an older woman because it tends to be around issues of women's rights and reproductive rights, a sign that says, am I still carrying this sign 40 years later? This whole idea of like, how long do we have to talk about these problems before we realize that they're real? And what are we doing? And the status quo is a perfect example, which is, I think, where philanthropy comes in, because status quo, it's as my, I won't go into it, but as you get a flavor for kind of how I think about these things, as my mom said to my sister after a really bad relationship, how'd that work out for you? Ultimately, where did that get you? And here we are. With so many challenges, and how do you not figure that out? And how do you demand a level of disruption? So sustainability, because I don't want the squirrels to be smarter than we are.
Nice introduction from the three of you, and it's interesting how you've put together, even without mentioning it explicitly, the various dimensions of sustainability. Whereas we're talking about the environment, the social dimension that has been so clear here, but also the economic one with examples from Michael as well, in terms of growth and this whole debate about growth versus degrowth, what we want for our future, right? And in this respect, I think that, and before jumping into the societal impact itself, maybe I would bring in, because it touches upon several of the comments that you've made, the SDG discourse, for instance, the Sustainable Development Goals. So how do you see this framework fitting all this discussion? Because we're talking about rights, we're talking about equality, we're talking about economic growth versus environmental sustainability as well. So how do you embrace this framework?
So I can lead with that sort of from a philanthropic perspective about what our foundation has been doing. I'm blanking on the political analysts who was quoted as saying, never let a good disaster go to waste. COVID is just that. I mean, everything that COVID has and continues to do is revealing the deep fissures in our society, and appreciate that my perspective to your description, Southeastern Massachusetts, 3 of the poorest communities in Massachusetts, albeit, you put it on an international screen, these are pretty prosperous places, but they are distinctly, I'm of and for and in a place, so that is what informs me. But I have to tell you, I've said this several times, how in 2020, supposedly the wealthiest nation in the world has people who don't have enough food. Mm-hmm. How is that even a thing? How is that even remotely possible? And that when something that we all saw coming, and unfortunately those in power who had something to do more about it did nothing and then proceeded to do even less, it became just all the worse. And that's a whole other conversation unto itself, obviously. But the opportunity to think about, boy, what are we doing with regards to sustainability for those communities? And here at the foundation, we're doing a deep dive, and this is also deeply informed by issues around racial inequity, and particularly about structural racism, about who has access to what. And just as a quick snapshot, we talk about education, the importance of education. We have taken great pride here at the Community Foundation for over 20 years, giving away millions and millions of dollars in scholarship money. So people can go to UMass Dartmouth, so they can go to Harvard, so they can go to MIT, go to the University of Coimbra, wherever they want to go, we want to support them. We started looking at who is getting those awards, Because a lot of our foundations, and not to go into Community Foundation 101, people come to us, they give us a bunch of money, they say, this is how I want you to spend it. So you think of us as a collection of 200 small little foundations, each with their own perspective. We get to influence them, but ultimately the donor directs where that goes. So oftentimes, particularly in scholarships, people are trying to recreate themselves or their parents or a child they lost and have an image of what they want the world to look like. And embedded in that is a lot of bias. So for instance, I'm going to leave you with one data point that really grounded me in how much work we have to do on this. At New Bedford High School, the largest school in our region, where we give most of our scholarships, 44% of the students identify as Latinx. 10%, less than 10% of them actually apply for scholarships. 5% of them get them. There is something deeply broken in that system, and we are part of it because we have been doing what we thought we were doing without ever looking about where the impact is. So, you know, a sustainability goal of education for all, places like UP has a responsibility, but we've got to do it a lot more effectively, a lot more intelligently, and with honest self-awareness. I kind of went off on a couple of different tangents, but I hope that was helpful, Anna.
Definitely, John. And it touches upon one of the SDGs, definitely the number 4, which is quality education and access to education, which is critical and interacts with the other ones as well. So, Luis, would you like to give some thoughts on this?
If I can go a bit back, I fully agree with the discussion of the words that are relevant. So I'm glad that the title of our talk is impact and not sustainability, because that's where I always am, and you already heard me speaking about this, is when I try to change gears to a more objective discussion, because I tend to think that sustainability can be too many different things to many people. So we need to become more objective to be effective. So I really like to change things towards impact. And in that sense, and connecting to the issues of the SDGs, I think they are becoming a very relevant and useful, tool, action, scenario, whatever we want to call them. For example, for the B Corp movement, they were, I think I can say they were there even before they existed, because what we came across was then when the 17 ODS came, the SDGs came to public, it was realized that our tool, the B Impact Assessment, the B Corp movement tool, was covering the 17 of them. It was a study done by an independent group of people working for the European Union, figured that out. But we were measuring in 5 different areas that existed pre-SDGs. And so the effort that was done for over a year was that a group of people from the B Lab and from the UN Global Compact worked together to create a tool similar to our B Impact Assessment, by which the companies can use to measure how they were regarding the different SDGs and how they can improve in each of them. So basically it has a first layer in which companies can identify which are the more relevant for them, because it's quite hard for companies to work with 17 different SDGs. And so they can be more focused and identify which are the ones that they can impact and how they can impact better, and even reporting in terms of the SDGs, because I think that's one of the most powerful things about the SDGs is the power they have in terms of communication, how present they are in daily life. Everyone knows the image is quite attractive. We can have blogs. Companies like to show in their reports, choose the blocks that they are contributing more for. You go to Amsterdam and you have sidewalks in which you have the SDGs embedded in the sidewalks. So it's becoming a more and more powerful tool that makes us remind every day and everywhere almost about what we need to do if we want to be there, and what our goals should be as a whole if we want to preserve the world as we have it.
Thank you, Luis. I remember in a seminar that you gave at Executive Education where you're talking about this link between the B Corp and the B Lab evaluation and the SDGs framework. So glad to follow this, how it has evolved. Michael, yes, please.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in on the SDGs too. I agree with everything that my fellow panelists mentioned. We at FLAD are certainly also thinking deeply about how we can, better assess our activities and our giving in terms of, measurable outcomes related to the SDGs and to ESG matters, more generally. It's certainly something we're thinking about. It's something that we haven't exactly developed a methodology for yet, but it's one of those items that we all are saying we really need to be thinking more deeply about this. One of the things that, at least I'll speak for me, I'm only one member of the board, but I think one of the things that we definitely want to avoid at FLAD, which I think is some companies are falling victim to this, which is, you kind of have the SDGs as an organizing principle, and it just sort of lends itself very easily to like a 17-box, checkbox system, right? And if you can check so many boxes, okay, you're doing just fine on sustainability related or ESG related measures, and I think that's sort of, as they say in Portuguese, para o inglês ver kind of sustainability. We all want to avoid, right? And moreover, I think with organizations like B Corp and others who you could say, are rating organizations and rating companies on what they're doing. I mean, they're getting more and more sophisticated, and I think they're getting better at sniffing that kind of greenwashing, whatever you want to call it, and sniffing it out. For me, I think, one of the main reasons why any organization ought to be thinking about outcomes in terms of the SDGs or outcomes in terms of environment, social transparency and governance issues, is really to be able to stand out from the other organizations that they kind of compete with, right? And to be seen as kind of a leader on these issues and not just a follower. And I was trying to think of in my own just sort of whatever, thinking out loud about companies that I have this image of as being leaders, right, on sustainability issues. And I remember reading about this guy out in, I think in Seattle, kind of a tech entrepreneur type, who's the head of this company called Gravity Payments. And he got a lot of press because he decided that, that he wasn't walking the walk when it came to inequality. And, his company was doing quite well, and, he was a millionaire, but he had friends who were basically, not able to afford a house in the Seattle area. And so he initiated this concept of, he's not going to pay anyone in his company less than $70,000 US a year. It's like a new minimum wage. And I think if my memory serves, his own compensation is only about 4 times more than what, the lowest paid worker is at his company. And to me, the fact that I remembered this guy and had read about it, it really kind of struck me as, okay, there's somebody who's really trying to lead, who's fundamentally reshaping what success looks like. And the irony is that when I went and tried to find out more about him and the name of his company, I saw a piece that showed that since he did this, the number of babies at his company has grown by a factor of 10. People are having babies at his company. Something like 10 times more of his workers have bought homes. They're contributing more to their 401ks. The companies, the workers are saying that they feel more engaged at work, et cetera, et cetera. So, even though I just, cautioned about using growth metrics as measures of success, and here I am. The bottom line was that he has I think a vision of sustainability, I would say properly understood, that it's about broadening, beyond what sort of your stock price is doing, right? And just your return to shareholders. It's more about a larger concept. And so I think companies like that, maybe companies like Patagonia, Rye, or some other ones that I was thinking about, who have this impression, at least that I'm left with, of companies that are really leading. And I think that's, where a lot of this interest and focus on, measuring impact and getting serious about impact is coming from. It's a need to differentiate oneself.
Definitely.
Oh, sorry, Anna.
Go on, John, please.
So what Michael said sort of inspired some thoughts that I have with regards to philanthropy, and sort of the philanthropic version of that gentleman is Mackenzie Scott, who you know, the former wife of Jeff Bezos, who made this big impact. I mean, she's a billionaire many times over, and all the amount of money she gave away to a whole variety of organizations. And unfortunately, like this gentleman in Seattle and too many, it's sort of the exception to the rule, that here is someone with incredible capacity, but approached it, which I would project onto this gentleman, what we think about, and there's a lot of conversation in philanthropy called around trust-based philanthropy. It's like believing that other people have their best intention at heart, and the best you can do for them is to empower them and share that incredible wealth. I mean, the disparate nature of wealth these days is absolutely insane. When we look at the money coming through my organization, you know, part of it is, well, all you have to do is look at the stock market, and it should be multiples of that. I mean, what an opportunity. And this is part of the most frustrating and yet inspiring, and I look to people like Luis to lead this, is there's incredible wealth being created right now in this globe. On this globe. How do we make sure that that is being shifted toward ways that sustain, yes, whatever we're going to have for that ruling class? We don't need an authoritarian one, which is maybe the next webinar, whole other conversation. But how do we think about, how do you empower those people on the ground who actually know what they're doing? I remember within 3 months of taking this job, I had someone come in and said, I'm looking at starting a rehab clinic has this new sort of theory of change and a whole new structure about how to move people off a variety of addiction. And they pitched me on the whole thing, and they said, what do you think about the science behind this? And I said, you're asking me? I said, I'm a background as an environmentalist and AIDS activist. I don't know anything about addiction. I said, I'm just the guy with the money. You're the expert. You need to lead this conversation. I mean, if you believe this and you've done your sound silence, how can I help you? And so I was really baffled. And you know, that power dynamic is a critical underlying factor around all of this. And how do we dismantle that in a way that is actually, you know, to Michael's very good example, that company is now thriving, and that CEO is now thriving. You know, it's sort of a win-win, and I would actually suggest, you know, Michael, there are growth, you know, outputs we want to see more of. They just have to be the right ones, right? And babies and happy families and job satisfaction, all good stuff.
Yeah, more years of a healthy life,
meaningful work.
Yeah, if I can jump in. The first thing regarding still the SDGs is that I remember a couple of years ago, I realized you at they already have classified all your subjects according to the SDGs. And that was, for me, a pioneer thing that is now being an approach that is now being used, I think, in other schools as well. So because students, the new generations give more and more value to that. I like very much the comments that were done by my colleague panelists regarding what Michael was saying. Namely, I have just two points I would like to address, and because I think it's worth to spend some time on them. One is again to do with language and with the ESG that Michael mentioned, and I would just to share with you a recent situation that I had with some colleagues. We have a WhatsApp group in which all the executive directors in different countries of the B Corp movement share opinions. And one of my colleagues was really annoyed because he said, how can it be that in the top 5 of the Financial Times Sustainability Index, we have Philip Morris and one mining company? How can we imagine those are on the top 5 that create a more interesting impact? And again, I'm using the word impact to try to change the settings that we tend to use. And my reaction was because it has to do with compliance, and because we use too much time, for me, in my opinion, the ESG criteria that are a bit compliance and not looking under the carpet. And that's why I love so much to use the impact approach. And that's what Michael was saying after, when he told about the impact that this CEO was creating. And that's what I think should be the focus on, and that is, I think, the challenge that we have on the table is going from the compliance to the measuring of the impact with tools that are of common knowledge, that can be comparable, that can be used by the daily people in their choices of the works, of the products they buy, of the companies they interact with in terms of their suppliers, etc. And actually, we try to provide companies with those tools and to make them share those good practices that Michael was also describing in terms of what that CEO did, make them think about those when they go through the assessment, because some of the questions that we're raising here are actually questions of the impact assessment, in which one of them is how many times earns the person that is best paid compared with the one that is worst paid. How many people are paid the minimum salary or even the living wage when that reality exists in those countries? How do we interact with your community? How is about the support to the maternity and paternity leave, in terms of healthcare? Then go to the environment and also to the community. How do you interact with community? Do you create local jobs? Do you buy locally? So trying to make companies think. There is no guidance in terms of you need to go from A to B to be more impactful. No, you need to think about this and share it. What is your approach to this? And that there's some guidance in terms of what have the others done, because usually it's a multiple choice question in which you can understand what are the other alternatives. And it is by sharing those good examples, like the one Michael was sharing, that we can evaluate the impact and benchmark the impact with the others and try to push things forward. I think it's very interesting to see that companies are successful and grow in terms of the impact. I think the other thing I was willing to address was the question of the growth. Maybe we want to grow like Michael and John were saying, that there is the growth of certain things, not necessarily the number of employees, the amount of sales. We need to look for other indicators. And those are appearing and becoming more and more relevant. We just need to figure out what they are and make people confident about those. Just to give you an example, and it's not about an indicator, but it's an indicator how companies can thrive and become successful. The chocolate leading company in the Netherlands nowadays, that is present in over 7 countries, was created with the purpose of ending slavery in cocoa plantations. And that is a completely coherent story behind it, because it was started by a journalist that did a survey about cocoa supply chain and understood that there was slavery involved. He tried to contact the big companies, and the phones were hanged up to him. He decided to make some fuss about it and decided to eat a lot of chocolate and go to the court and say, I abused of slavery work. And that created what he would like, a lot of noise. He started at the same time buying cocoa butter at a fair price and producing chocolate packed in red. So he gave a red card to the chocolate industry, with an uneven distribution in terms of the squares of the chocolate to represent the uneven distribution of the value created in the supply chain. And they created a business model that was based as a starting point of how much those people that work in cocoa plantations need to earn to have a decent living if they work. And based on that, they pay them by the cocoa they produce. What they tell and are willing to share with all the chocolate producers is that they used to pay 10 cents per the amount of cocoa that they use in a chocolate tablet. Now they pay 20. For the producers, it makes all the difference. For them, the tablet costs 3 euros. So in terms of economics, it doesn't make a lot of changes in the economics. It changes all the way the company positioning themselves, communicates themselves, create impact in the society. They start showing to those people what the cocoa was used for, because they didn't even know that. They're creating prizes for the best producers so they can come to Europe and see where to the fairs in which the chocolate and the cocoa are discussed. They created a plan to produce cocoa butter in those countries so the added value can stay there. And that created an all new way of positioning themselves that became them to be the top company in chocolate in the Netherlands, and becoming very successful in all the countries that they have been entering so far. Mm-hmm. This shows how this growth can be together with social impact growth as well. Mm-hmm. Even how the focus in the social impact growth can create the other kind of growth that we are used to be putting in the first place, that is the monetary one.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Luis, for sharing this. And definitely, I think that what we've been discussing here answers already the question on how can the creation of societal impact interact with sustainability. It's very clear how by creating societal impact will have an impact on sustainability in the various dimensions, namely on using the framework of the SDGs that you've said, that you've discussed already. And so many interesting things that you've raised here that I think would have topics for I don't know how many webinars from here. But I would like to pick on, so this example that Luis gave and Michael was referring before to the competition and the idea that, so companies often are using this kind of even rankings and ratings to show how well they're doing, and these frameworks to show how they are performing to differentiate themselves from competition, which of course is part of the game, let's say. But it's crucial as well to see how companies, by changing their business models, just like Luis was sharing now, a very specific example, and how this can impact the system as a whole. So how can other companies mimic from seeing what others are doing? So I think this raises, again, another very interesting topic. So I'll leave with this question and follow up on what the specific story of Luis and others that you may have. So what can companies do to boost their social and societal in general impact towards a better future? And of course, what is the role of nonprofits in this process as well? So how do you see this coming now and in the future? So there are examples of what is being done now, but what else can companies do and nonprofits as well? John, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to. And so I think one thing that needs to start, and actually is we actually started a new fund here called the Leadership Equity Fund, which when we looked at the landscape in our region, and particularly as we thought about our racial equity work, we realized there are very few people of color running nonprofit organizations in a part of the state which is very racially diverse. We also did not see a lot of up and coming staff people of color. And so where was that opportunity? And if we can't figure out how to do that in the nonprofit world, how do you then expect the for-profit world to follow? And we've been very successful in raising money and then turning around to support, particularly Black, but all BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or people of color led nonprofits that are doing anti-racism work, and then also underwriting the professional development for staff people at nonprofits, particularly for small nonprofits that don't have a professional development expense line. We want to make sure that those resources are there. So I only raise that because I think, and this came to fruition about a year ago. I was asked to join an advisory board for a financial services organization here, very philanthropic group, really, incredibly generous to the community, and a lot of big checks get given out, literally and figuratively. And at the annual meeting, they introduced all of us from the advisory committee. And what an impressive array of racial, gender, and ethnic diversity. They then announced all the senior promotions that were happening. And you guys know where I'm going with this. And to a person, they were all white, primarily male, and you know, basically mainstream. And I actually had a conversation with them. I said, you guys don't, I don't think you don't get it, but I don't think you understand what this means. And I think part of this is when you go to the root of a lot of these issues is who's at the table and who has a voice. And so companies and nonprofits all need to understand that they need to make sure those whom they serve are at that table and that it is reflective of the community. So if you are running a business that serves a community that looks like X, your board of directors, your senior management, your C-suite, your middle management, all the way through ought to look like that. So we start moving away from this sort of patriarchal, paternalistic, you know, I know better than you do sensibility, because unless you have people at the table who's, you know, truly understand the lived experience, you're missing a whole bunch of it. And so I think one of the elements that people can do is look at who they're talking to. And I will say, in full disclosure, and Anna, please do not hear this as a criticism, we're four white people having this conversation. Now, I don't pretend to understand the demographics of Portugal, so I won't project on that. But when I'm sitting in a Zoom here in the United States and it looks like this, I'm thinking, we've got work to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, John. And we're supposed to have another participant that could not come, which would help. And it's addressing that, but thank you for. I understand your comments, of course, and it's very important, and it's something that it's important for us as well. Definitely, thank you, John.
Appreciate it.
I was just going to chime in that, you know, here in Portugal, increasingly, I think people are finally being sort of shamed into how common this is. For example, the gender distribution of panels on television, and you know, social organizations here in Portugal, you know, routinely you have these manels, you know, rather than panels, and you know, and it's becoming more and more, I think, obvious that how out of whack this is. But it takes, you know, both men and women, I think, to sort of remind the organizers of these events, hey, you got a problem here, you know, and you know, here's what it is. It's not just a problem of optics, you know, and I think it's truly, if you're really concerned about what ultimately it is that you're hearing from, what perspectives are coming in to help you decide, you know, you're really being short-sighted, and there's tons of you know, scientific evidence to prove that companies that have more diverse boards, and I think the same would be true for the not-for-profit world, you know, have more success, you know, as traditionally measured, right? And you know, the bottom line is actually helped by having a more diverse management structure. And so Portugal has a long way to go on this. There's the entire sort of ethnic and racial diversity issue here was woken up in some respect, you know, by the Black Lives Matter protests in the States, and then there's sort of reverberations, not just here in Portugal, but across Europe. You know, and I think in terms of sustainability, you know, in some ways the same thing. I mean, we've been woken up by the, you know, I go back to your comment at the beginning, John, about COVID. You know, I remember, you know, during the height of the lockdown, we heard reports about how the dolphins were coming back up the Tejo here and were routinely being seen. You know, and people, oh, that's wonderful, you know, but after a while, right, you know, what you kind of hear the drumbeat of is, you know, when can we get back to, you know, pre-COVID times? When can we get back to, you know, tourism and the numbers of, you know, tourist boats and tourist flights that we had coming into Portugal? And like you said, I mean, we had a crisis that was quite convenient in terms of thinking about a reset. And I honestly fear that, you know, in our and I don't want to underplay how serious the crisis was for many people. And of course, there's very good reasons for folks wanting to get back on their feet economically. I'm not underplaying that. But I feel like in many ways we didn't really think deeply about what the COVID crisis showed us could happen, and we're kind of focused on just getting back to normal, and we can't afford normal anymore.
If I can pick on that, and I was thinking about mentioning that earlier on, that in fact we have not felt the effect of the COVID as B Corp movement in such a negative way. Of course, we've been surrounded by a lot of difficulties and people suffering, but we could say, oh, your thing stopped or whatever. No, for us it was the opposite, because I think the COVID, like you said a while ago, brought up in the agenda some of the issues we are trying to address on one hand, and that was connected to the way that we realized that companies that were already having a certain approach were more effective in the way they were dealing with the situation. We did some surveys and we realized that the number of jobs that were lost during COVID in big corps was significantly lower than in the average companies. I remember someone from Brazil, a colleague from Brazil, once in an event saying that they have like 180 certified big corps, and during COVID, one closed down. When we know that a lot of companies closed down during COVID in Brazil, for example, just to give you an idea about that. So I tend to be a bit optimistic and think that we have learned a bit. Of course, we need not to forget, because we tend to forget things quite fast as a society. I usually, and probably Annie already saw me presenting that, usually present a quote from Henry Ford saying that a company that just generates money, it's a poor company. And Henry Ford was not a poetic guy. On the contrary, he was very pragmatic and willing to sell a lot of black cars to everyone that would like to have a car. And so I think we forgot for a while, and quite easy, that societal impact that companies should have for the society as a whole, and involving all the stakeholders that are the players, after all, of the society, because economy is a social business, and we tend to forget that, and management is a social business, so we need to address the issues on those areas as social business, so taking into account the different layers, the different interactions that they create and generate. And I think that's what has been forgotten for the last couple of decades, and that's why we see the business schools, and fortunately now some big shots saying that it's not feasible anymore to say you come here to maximize the profit of your shareholders, but that was told at the beginning to the people that enter the business schools. And so what I think in terms of the future impact that the companies should have in society is that they should start changing those indicators that we were discussing and finding new ones and working for those new ones, understanding those are the ones that are creating the competitiveness for them for the future. And the diversity is just one example. There are, like was said, a lot of data showing that diversity creates more competitiveness in the investment funds, in whatever we look, diversity, because it creates, like was said, this right way of seeing the world we need to interact with. Because if a company is not creating a solution for the ones that would be their clients, it should be killed if not creating value for the society as a whole. The society should have tools to make that company close. So it need to take into account all those needs and being able to solve a problem, so people are willing to pay the salaries to the others in the company that are solving that problem, because that's how it works. We sometimes, I think, we tend not to think about that, but companies exist because there are some customers that are willing to pay the salaries of the people that work there. So as soon as that doesn't happen, the company closes down. So and the consumers are the society, so the societal impact should be created. And nowadays, in which we live in a transparent, more and more, I had a couple of years ago, the idea that we were living in a hyper transparency era, and everything is pretty much knowledgeable by everyone. So if some company is doing something that the consumer feels is not right, that can have a devastating effect on the company.
And very fast.
And very fast, and uncontrollable. So what I think we can do, and that's why the B Corp movement appeared and is trying to push forward, is we want the companies to be not only the best in the world, but the best for the world in terms of the impact they create. And that's why we create this assessment that allows company to think about how you deal with diversity, how you deal with interactions with your community, how you deal with the way you create environmental impact, how you deal with your workers in terms of and how you support them, and how do you hear them, even in terms of your consumers. Are you hearing that they will? Are you giving them the support they need after they buying your things? Mm-hmm. Are you involving them in the creation of your new products? Because this is what is needed to create the value for the society. And this is what is more and more valued every day. And that's why the social value of the brands that becomes now more and more spoken out is increasing so much. And that's why we can also see in a broader term the same thing that was being said about diversity in terms of being more a factor that increases competitiveness. The way we can see is that the B Corps are becoming more and more effective in attracting talent, because people want to work on those kind of companies, in attracting investment, even in selling more, because people go and already know if they see a B Corp on a product, they can have confidence that the structure behind that product is concerned with the different impacts it causes in society. So I'm very glad to hear some friends that now drink Symington wine that has a B Corp logo, saying, now I feel much more comfortable while I'm drinking my wine, because besides experiencing the nice tasting of the wine, I also feel that I'm promoting a balanced support to the society that created, or the company that created this product, that has a positive impact on society. Because if that doesn't exist, it's just the short-term revenues that will play a role, and that company will disappear. If we take, for example, the Symington example, if the Douro wine is not preserved as it should, their business is out. They will be out of business in a couple of weeks or decades, whatever, because their most important asset is the Douro region. So that's where they should focus. And if you go and check their mission, and this has been a work that we've been doing and has evolved, and why should they communicate, we want to do the best wines? Maybe it's not even the best thing for them to communicate. They should communicate, we want to preserve the Douro region. Because if that doesn't exist, we don't have business. And I think it's this way of looking into the things by the companies in a more broad approach in terms of the time frame and geographical, because we always tend to think that we can go and buy very cheap things from China, but if there is a social problem in China, it's nothing to do with us. So the distance changes depending on what we want to achieve. That would make the difference in the future for companies to create real value that we need to measure with new and more efficient tools, other than the ones that are used to put an euro in everything, because it's very arguable. I usually say that what is more valuable? It's to prevent the emission of one CO2, 1 ton of CO2, or to create a new job. And we at the impact assessment give points to this. There are some systems that try to put euros on this, and I feel very hard to put some euros on this. Our figures allow to benchmark with different companies, but not in a global approach of euros. That's what I think it's sometimes what we try to use to measure everything. Even in the social area, we try to come up with the ROI to put euros on the euro invested, and it's very difficult because sometimes it's not fair for the different, because the areas are completely different.
You're raising here the measurement of impact, which is a challenge itself. John.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. So much that you said sort of get stuff going in my head. And one of the other things that we have learned about, and I want to talk a little bit more about a different point, but the fragility of our supply chain economy. I mean, everyone's talking about that now, and there's these great ads locally. It's like, well, if you buy in downtown New Bedford, it's not stuck at the port in San Diego. And so there's so much to be said for that, how we localize that and remove some of those. But the other thing I wanted to sort of talk a little bit about is that there's this real tension around the urgency of the issue and how long it's going to take to get it corrected, right? I mean, and on all of these issues, you know, they all sort of intersect, but it's how you remove ourselves, because we've all touched on, you know, the short-term, my version of the short-term gratification of what we need to know, of the information, the social media world that we live in. And, you know, I want it now. And Amazon, really 2 days? I can't get it tomorrow? It's ridiculous. But at the same time, when you think about those larger movements that we are working upon, and the challenge as you posed, Anna, it's like, how do companies and nonprofits boost their social impact? Is act with urgency, but with a long view. And there's a series of sort of aspects that I just quickly jotted down that we at Hire adhere to here. It's like, yeah, you need to understand what your value system is. And I think speaking to Luis is like, why are you doing this? If you're doing it, and full disclosure, before I started my nonprofit work, I was a banker. And every quarter, what did we do for shareholder return? And then every 3 months is like, what did you do for shareholder return? I'm like, okay, I can't, I'm getting off this treadmill. And it was like, what are your values? Being really intentional about what your goals are around those values. Constant, and this is the hard part, particularly for people who get to be a certain age like myself, you are always in a learning posture. You are gonna know more tomorrow than you did yesterday. And if you're not paying attention. And it's like how you are constantly learning and understanding, okay, we've got to change this, try something else. So that requires focus. The other thing, which is the anathema for a lot of corporate offices and nonprofit corner offices, is humility. Sort of like understanding who you are in this and holding that power appropriately, embracing it, but don't confuse that power with sort of what you're capable of. And I think there's so much to be said for being very intentional and having this long view, because like that poor woman holding the sign, how long am I going to protest this thing? You know, I don't want my, you know, I now have grandnieces and nephews who are 1 and 2 years old, and I'm 60 years old. And I think, what is the world going to look like in 2080? To the point that Luis started off with his 4 children. Of course we care about sustainability. I can't even begin to imagine. I can't begin to imagine. And so that's why the long view for these companies is critical and not a reason to not do it.
Thank you, John. You raised very interesting, important points. I tend to think of my posture in terms of an hashtag, which is never stop dreaming, never stop learning, because it's how it is. As I say, we need to be constantly with this approach in order to learn what is out there, what can we do better. And I love the urgency with the long-term view, of course, which is the importance of strategy as well. So I come from the strategy background, and the classes with the people coming from nonprofit organizations, where they have to deal with very urgent matters daily. And then I try to raise exactly this. So there's a need to answer today to the needs of what is out there. But we need to think strategically about the future as well. And of course, sustainability enters this discussion if it is integrated in the strategy of the organization and not as an add-on, whereas we're talking about a company or a nonprofit organization. So, and the importance of values, of course, it's critical. Thank you for this. There's been surrounding some of what has been said until now, but I would like to maybe stress the role of collaboration in all this, because we've raised the competition side of it to become better and to show what we're doing. But of course, if you think about the 17th goal, which is partnerships for the goals. So what has been the role of collaboration in your organizations specifically to address these challenges? Michael, would you like to maybe?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. I was thinking of weighing in as John was talking. I was I was having a flashback to, if we were having this discussion like back in the 1950s or 60s, and it would be such a simple answer to your question, about what can companies do to boost their social impact. I think the answer that my parents' generation were given was, well, what's good for General Motors is good for America, right? That was kind of like that was a very simple answer. And thank God, we've made some progress, right? Nobody talks that way anymore. But to get back to, all right, sorry, that's my one editorial there. To get back to your question, I think collaboration is, it's interesting, coming from an academic background, and now, here I am with my FLAD hat on. I've kind of worked under two different administrations here, or I've been part of two different administrations here at FLAD. And they're very different in terms of their attitudes towards collaboration. And so I feel like just in one organization, the role of leadership is fundamental. I think, in the previous moment at FLAD, we had this image that we should be very careful about institutional collaborations, because, FLAD has a long history of giving money to other organizations who then take credit for what they're doing. And we need to be careful about, showing what FLAD is doing and who we are. That was kind of the operating mentality as a philanthropy, that we need to do more things ourselves because others are taking credit for what we're doing. And thank goodness this administration, our current president Rita Fada, I think has a very different attitude about institutional collaboration, and it's not so much about who gets credit for doing good things. It's really about doing good things, and trying to figure out, well, what's the best way to deliver those good things, and if there are other institutions around who have certain skills, certain networks, whatever, that FLAD can help expand, or to deepen in some ways, not just through the use of money, but maybe also through our expertise and contacts, then we should work with them. And I would say that that's one thing that I've really noticed as a big difference just in my 2 terms here on the executive board, a new attitude towards collaboration, and one that I'm fully supportive of. I just think that most really good solutions, and I guess I'm giving away my own sort of ideological leanings here, but I think most really good solutions in the world tend to come, out of a collective and not out of one person's brain. In general, 2 sets of eyes are almost always better than one. And so when you work in collaboration, I think, inevitably your own values, your own ideas, your own way of thinking about particular issues or problems are probably going to be impacted, informed, altered by the groups that you're working with. And I think that's only a positive thing. So, it's just my own little niche of window on collaboration from a philanthropy perspective.
Thank you, Michael. And here we are collaborating, right?
Exactly.
In this webinar. Yeah, that's an example. Thank you. John.
Thank you. It's interesting, and Michael, your comment about the 50s and if it's good for GM, fascinating, right? And at the same time, I double checked a quote that I was thinking about, and it was Harry Truman, president during the 50s, that said, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And there's something to be said for that. And I want to really hear from Luis on this, because this is something, collaboration has been. Philanthropists have beat the drums on the need for nonprofits to be collaborative. Like, oh my God, you're all worried about hunger or education. Why can't you all do this together? And so the tension around competition and collaborative in the nonprofit world is very much driven by the power dynamic behind philanthropy that demands it. Yet, so much of that money is raised in a competitive framework. So while I think, and maybe this is just my lack of imagination, or, I'm in the United States, so it's Monday morning here, maybe this afternoon I might think more crisply about this, is collaboration is embedded in what we do. Everything we do is like, how do we have partners? Because to Michael's point, the collective is so much more powerful. It's that other wonderful saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We need to go fast. We need to go fast and far, but better far than fast. So the whole concept of collaboration is very much, and we love making grants where that happens, but, and this is an important but, it has to elevate everybody. You can't have a collaboration just for the sake of being, say, you did it together. It's like, how are you all improving each other's game in that realm? The challenge for me is when you have a sector in the, which is very much what we're talking about here, which is the for-profit world that is motivated by profit. How do you bring collaboration that it also supports profit? And so I'm always intrigued by that natural tension between, you don't create an animal with teeth and not expect it to bite, right? And so it's like, how do you make that happen? So Louise, do you have the answer?
You can domesticate the dogs.
That's a good one.
That would be a simple answer, but in terms of what I can share in a bit broader terms, one of the curious things, and I usually use that sometimes in my presentations, is that I see things becoming more and more fuzzy, if it's, maybe it's not the best word. It's, if I put in front of people purposes or missions, whatever we prefer, from companies and NGOs, they tend to have problems in identifying if it's a company or an NGO. I give you the example of Tony's Chocolonely. If we go to Patagonia, that say we want to save the world, and it's a company that it's a big one. So I think the idea is that the structure that is going to solve the problem can have different legal structures, but at the end of the day, it will choose the one that is more efficient to address the problem using the business, or I won't say even the business, the model that they figured out to be the most appropriate one. And I think that is aligned with what I see in terms of the collaborations. For us, the fact that B Corp is an NGO, it's interesting because people sometimes ask, now this is becoming very hot and there are a lot of tools appearing and even the governments are pushing. How do you feel about that? What if one day everyone is dealing with this and using this and is becoming a B Corp? And I always say that would be great because we don't have any shareholders that would be unhappy because they don't have their shares anymore because the company closed. We are an NGO, so we'll be happy because our mission was accomplished, and no one we're going home sad because we don't have now the rewards we were expecting because the reward is there already. So in that sense, the collaboration is embedded, and it's one of the most important things we have in our organization. Not only by the way we interact with other organizations, we had collaborations with GRI, the Global Report Initiatives, in terms of helping companies to understand how they can report using the Global Report Initiative based on the impact assessment they have done. The one that I told you about, the UN Global Compact for the SDGs, is another one. We recently did another one with fair trade, so we could have the questions and the requisites for the supply chain addressed in a more how can I say, easy way for companies to understand that they don't need to deal with different things, that they are aligned. So in a more aligned way, we do the others that are already also in the field in some of the areas. And we promote a lot of the collaboration between the companies, not only by creating the share of their know-how using a platform similar to Facebook, in which companies, one of the things that I remember is I did this diversity initiative in my company. Who has done something similar, or I have here my code of ethics I want to share if the others want to use, or who knows where there are ecological packaging for food because I want to change my packaging, or who has already changed the B Corp logo from the back of the packaging to the front. I'm thinking about that. Have you experienced that? All these things are shared between people that belong to the movement. This gives room for a lot of collaborations. I've been organizing some meetings in which at the beginning of the meeting, people start saying, where is the coffee break? Because I'm already having a lot of ideas that I want to discuss with this guy that I'm seeing on the other side of the table. And this created like project like the one between a company that was having a very interesting business model that was renting jeans, because they figured out that was the best way to lower the impact that jeans we use are causing to the environment. And so we rent them, and we don't need them anymore, we give them back. And they collaborated with the cosmetic companies in which they did some, I never know the word in English, some clothes for the people that work in beauty salons and their dressers, so they can use with both brands to show their commitment to the environment. Or Ben & Jerry's that collaborated with a beer company to create an ice cream with beer flavor. Or the Tony's Chocolonely that I told you a while ago that collaborated with a brew company to create a beer with chocolate flavor. Or what we had with the recently during the last B Corp month, in which we did in Portugal, the way that in each day all companies would communicate to one of the companies of the B Corp movement, because that was that company day, and they would tell the good things of being a B Corp movement about that company. And one of them, Symington, invited a company to go there and have a seminar with them, because they organized every week a seminar about the different ways of being B Corp, and they ended up doing a yoga class all together on Zoom a couple of days after. Or the frequent contacts I got from wine companies now, because they interacted with Symington and they told them how good it is to be B Corp and what they've been doing with the B Corp tools. Don't you want to use it as well? Even cross countries, I get contacts from my colleagues saying, Luis, here is someone that wants to know more about your company because they interact with this company of yours. Or some companies that I have in Portugal that call me saying, Luis, I have a client in the Nordics that asked me if I am a B Corp. What is the B Corp? So we live in community. That's no way of going around that. And we promote that, and that creates competitiveness in terms of the way. I never forgot that a couple of years ago, I read a book that was called Co-Petition. And that was meaning that sometimes we compete, sometimes we cooperate. And that might be the more sophisticated answer that I start giving to John in terms of domesticating the dog, is that he knows that there are some that he should bite, but some others he should not.
Thank you, Luis. And I'm sorry, I just had a coughing attack, so I was turning off my camera for a second. Now that you raised this, Luis, this co-petition, which is, of course, what was behind my question as well. So I'm very happy that you raised it. And putting this together with what you mentioned before of the role of the business schools, and how many of us have been raised with a shareholder perspective in mind. What would you say is the role of education in all this process, specifically business schools? So how would you sum up the role of education? And of course, we're here in the context of a program that has been designed from scratch with the sustainability and, of course, the impact throughout the various areas of management. But in general, so what would you say is the role of education? John, would you like to start, or Luis?
Sure, happy to. I mean, I think, you know, and this may be overly simplistic, but I think it is something that is quite often not observed in some of the conversations we have, and I use the context of our racial equity work. People think, okay, you do education, you do arts and culture, you do economic opportunity, and you do racial equity. I'm like, no. We do those three things, and they are all informed by racial equity. So I think it's essential that you don't approach this as, okay, this business school model is you have accounting, you have finance, and you have sustainability. It's like, no, sustainability is a value system that feeds and guides and drives each and every one of them. So it's not an add-on, it's not an elective, it's not a nice to have, it is essential to have. It is critical. My mom just went through a period of health, and I was amazed at the variety with which medical professionals deal with their patients. And this is well known how surgeons have the worst bedside manner, because they are tacticians, they are, whatever you want. I'm not coming up with the right word, but they're gods, right? And so they don't feel like they have to do that. We have to really dismantle that. And I want to go back to that word humility that I raised earlier, that the power of that and the power to understand who you are in this and how you do need to think more collectively. Because to Louise's very good point, it makes me crazy, this conversation we have in this country about individualism and blah, blah, blah. And I did this for myself. I'm like, interesting. How did you get to work? Did you pave that road? Did you make that car? Did you actually build that fire department and make sure if your house burned last night? It's like, no. You got to dismantle that and build a culture of sustainability, both, on every level and woven throughout.
Thank you, John.
Well, as an educator, I guess I should weigh in here, right? Well, I think, one of the most important things that we can do in the education area, I think is, especially in this highly polarized environment. I mean, I feel I'm living in somewhat of an island here in Portugal, thankfully, compared to what I hear is going on back home. In the States, even within my own family, there are certain topics that just cannot be discussed anymore. But I think you have this double responsibility as an educator to not inculcate in any way, but to really try and bring a wide array of perspectives and to get students to think, outside the box, so to speak, of, where their world and where they're coming from. All of us come from, particularly our family socialization, but school socialization, where, our communities, and to really sort of broaden that perspective and get them to question. I think, the most successful classes in my own life were ones that really kind of rocked my world in terms of getting me to rethink some basic, presuppositions and assumptions that I had. And to me, those are the most successful classes, those are the most successful programs. That really challenge students to think why they think the way they do, and then to look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of different perspectives. And I'm sure that's what Ishkate's sustainability program, the MBA, is trying to achieve. So to me, it's about exposure to different ideas and forcing students to confront assumptions and where they come from.
Thank you, Michael. Please.
Yeah, and just a funny thing, because just another example of the collaboration that I was speaking, just entered my door now that we are speaking. Some products from German B Corps that are willing to share those with the Portuguese B Corps, because we're going to have a community meeting on Friday. And so they are sending things over so I can share with the Portuguese campus on Friday. So that another way of exemplifying give you example of how the companies are collaborating. Regarding education, I was ready to jump because that's for me one of my passions. And I do really believe, like Mandela said, that education is the most powerful weapon to change the world. And we started by saying we need to change. And so if we want to change, we need to definitely use the education. So to give you an idea about the importance that it has for me and for the way I'm been dealing with this challenge of promoting the B Corp movement. Last time we were able to meet in presence, the B Corp community was, I think, 2 years ago in Amsterdam. And we were invited to go from different countries to the stage and come up with our dream. And what I said at that time was that I'm very bad at dreaming because I'm trained as a scientist, so I have tend to be with my feet on earth. But my desire was that in 5 years' time, nobody would leave the Portuguese management schools without knowing that a B Corp tool to measure impact existed. They can use it or not, but at least they should know that it exists. So I think the education will have a key role in changing. And I'm very glad to be here. I was this week in another university, and I will be probably next week. So I think there is no week that goes by without me being invited and being either by, it's interesting, by students club sometimes, not by the faculty sometimes, but also by the students. And it's a pleasure for me to be able to share the tools that exist, the good examples, because sometimes they want to know about those examples and how they can learn more about those. Can I work there? Keep receiving emails of people doing master theses or PhDs in which they want to address these kind of issues and to be able to interact with some of the companies they think might help them to learn a bit about that. So I think there is a huge room for that. And we in the movement have an area that we call the B academics, that are people in academia that are also willing to support these kind of tools and learning more about them. So it's really key for changing anything. And if we're positioning ourselves as a movement that wants to change the world for better, of course, education has to be one of the top priorities.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thank you all for your comments. And of course, from our side, from academia, we also collaborate with other universities and our other institutions to make sure that we accomplish our mission as well. I can think about various partners in the country and outside the country to boost sustainability in education. We are involved in different projects at home and abroad as well. So definitely we need to walk the talk as well when it comes to this, and we are trying to do this path as well. So as we are heading to the end of this webinar with a lively discussion on creating a societal impact and its interaction with sustainability as well, the role of companies, the role of NGOs, and so many challenges that we face nowadays, I would just go through all of you once more to ask you for a very short message that you'd like to give to our audience, to those who are watching us today and that will watch us in the future. So I will just follow my screen here. John, would you like to start?
Sure, and as you've come to appreciate, brief is a challenge, but I will try my best. I guess there are 2 points I want to leave a group with, and let me start off by saying thank you so much for inviting me. It's an absolute joy, and getting to know you as well as Luis and Michael has been an absolute gift and a pleasure. And it's really exciting, particularly as I look to my retirement, much of which will be in Portugal. But there are 2 thoughts that come to mind. One a little pithy, one a little more grounded, and it's not an abdication of responsibility for our generation, but for me, it's like, listen to the young people. I really want to elevate and celebrate the next generations that are coming behind us, because there's so much incredible work, but there and potential, and I believe / hope that there's an understanding that we are not weighted by virtue of whatever time periods we came of age. Secondly, and I'm a big believer, and I think Luis said earlier how optimistic he is. It is a finite planet with infinite possibilities. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, John. Luis.
John, thank you for setting the perfect stage for what I had in mind. That is, take your decisions, do your choices, bearing in mind that is the planet we have for all of us and for the future generations. And so make the right choices, try to use the right tools and the right approach for the world as a whole, and not only looking to yourself.
Thanks a lot for those reports, Luis. And Michael, I would like to end the session with you, once again, thanking you and FLAD for this collaboration and partnership in this program and this webinar specifically on behalf of Ishkate Executive Education and Ishkate Business School. So some final words, Michael, please.
Well, I'll basically echo everything that has already been said, especially, it's crazy that I was saying how we hadn't had a chance to meet, even though I spent 20 years living in your neck of the woods. And so here's the global community bringing two neighbors back together again. Yeah, it's hard for me to give a pithy response because, other than, question everything, I mean, we're at one of those critical moments. It feels like to me, we're at just if our planet survives, into the future, let's hope it does. We're gonna look back and say that this was one of those critical moments in world history. It really feels that way. And, I think the gap that we see between this, as John said, the younger generation, for better or for worse, I know a lot of people love her or hate her, Greta, and her basically this refrain that she's been on lately about, blah, blah, blah. I think that's the way that a lot of the younger generation looks at the institutional powers that have been making the authoritative decisions about the economy and so much else. And to me, I think this goes back to maybe that May '68 moment, when a younger generation had also, just a cultural zeitgeist that was completely different from their parents' generation. And to me, I think that gap has really how it's resolved, whether that younger generation gets co-opted into the systems of consumption that sort of predominate in today's world. I think there's a lot of social forces that are working in that direction, right? Or gets rejected, and ultimately this next generation, fundamentally reshapes everything from politics to the economy, to the way that elections are run, to the length of mandates. It's another one of the main problems that I think anyone in the political world has. Their time horizons are just, by definition, in a democracy, they're not the long-term time horizon that John referred to earlier. And that's a structural problem, right? In some ways, companies, maybe have a chance here structurally to be the leaders, because, they, with a certain type of leadership, they can have the long-term horizon. So I don't have a short answer. I'm full of lots of worries and lots of optimism, but I'm happy to be at an organization that is trying to put its money into, into efforts and areas that we think are of the future and not of the past. And we think that, Ishkate's MBA in sustainability is one of those possible solutions for training the next generation of managers to think differently.
Thank you very much. And indeed, we're looking for those change makers, those that want to bring sustainability to the core of strategy, to the core of the business of the organization, whatever type of organization it is. So once again, thank you very much to my distinguished guests. It was really a pleasure to be here with you. And we'll continue promoting these webinars with our partners. So stay tuned. Thank you very much and have a brilliant day.
Thank you, Anna. Bye-bye.
Thanks
Thank
again,
you all.
Thank
It was a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you, John.
Great to meet
Thank
you,
you.
Luis and John.